Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our program, Introduction to Wildflowers. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions for Bill, please enter them into the Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our guest. Bill Gette is the former sanctuary director at the Joppa Flats Education Center in Newburyport, Massachusetts. A skilled teacher and field trip leader, he has been leading domestic and international natural history expeditions since 1986. He has led very successful programs throughout the United States and to all 7 continents. Please join me in welcoming Bill Gette.
Good afternoon, Helen. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I always appreciate the opportunity to work with you. And good afternoon, folks. I've been having a little bit of trouble with my internet. So if my screen freezes for a few seconds, I don't know it until a few seconds afterwards, and I hope you'll bear with us for that. I've always been interested in wildflowers and ferns and things like that, but I'd never really taken a lot of time to study them until the start of the pandemic, at which point, basically they told us you should not go out in public and stay by yourself. So I decided, well, I know something about wildflowers, but maybe I'll really focus on it. And since that time, I photographed over 350 species of wildflowers, basically in Essex County, Massachusetts, and some parts of Maine. But these are plants in this area that you should be able to find. I mean, they are here. The beauty of wildflowers is they don't move very fast. Okay, so I love to go back to the same place, to the same plant, and throughout the growing season, and see it as it changes, as it becoming into blossom, as it forms seeds, and then as it prepares for the winter. So it's really fun, I think. And I'm hoping to give you some information that will make it easier for you to start a real interest in wildflowers. It takes a while to learn the various different terms that are used and also to understand how those are applied. And my objective at the end of this is to have you make sure you have a better understanding and can appreciate the diversity of wildflowers. And just on the introductory screen here, we have red, depending on which book you want. Typically, it's red, called red trillium, sometimes called purple trillium. It's the same thing. And you can see it has the trillium. It has 3 petals and 3 sepals for the trillium. And on the right-hand side is an orchid, and that's grass pink. So we'll just start in here, and some of the references I use. If you go to the very bottom, it says Wildflowers of New England by Ted Elliman. That's the New England Wildflower Society. That is one of the latest guides, has the most recent terminology. They're using photographs for identification. If you go up to the very top one, that's the Field Guide to Wildflowers of Northeastern and North Central North America. That's pretty out of date, except that the illustrations are excellent. Okay, so in that case, they're using illustrations as opposed to photographs. Botany in a Day is a good reference. Flora Novae Anglii is, if you want to really get into a lot of detail, you could try that. Newcomb's Wildflower Guide is excellent. It's another guide with very good illustrations. And I just used another Northwoods Wildflowers because that pertains to our area here. Some other online references that you can use. I'm very fascinated by scientific names. Where do they come from? And you can make a whole study of just taking a look at scientific names. But Dave's Garden, just put in Dave's Garden, and you'll see an area where it talks about scientific names and shows you first of all, what does that scientific name mean? And very often the origin of it. And then there are other online guides like Go Botany. That's a National Native Plant Trust. It's an identification guide that you could use too. These are my photographs. And in terms of the presentation outline, we'll take a look at the plant and flower parts. It's really important to know if you're looking at your field guide to know what is called what. What's important. The flower reproductive parts, really important. Flower types, Now, the inflorescence or the blossom forms that they come in, leaf forms, you'll notice as we go later on, field guides will talk to you about how are the leaves arranged on the stem. Right? And they'll also talk about the margins. Is it smooth or do they have teeth? That type of thing. We'll take a look at the various different fruit types, which is really interesting if you go in later on in the season. We're going to walk through an identification process using the Elliman text to show you how that works. And then we'll talk to you about various different types of how the diversity of a wildflower, show you a number of different plant groups like carnivores and things of that nature. Okay, so in terms of plant and flower parts, okay, the axil. Okay, this is very often they will talk in the field guides about the axil. The axil is where the leaf meets the stem. In the case of the one on the left-hand side, that's field sow thistle. Okay, the leaf is clasping, but again, that is where the leaf is meeting the stem. And then if you take a look on the right-hand side, the thin-leaved sunflower, that's also an axil. In this case, the leaf has a stalk on it called a petiole. But again, it's where the leaf is meeting the stem. The bract is those things that are, as you can see in the knapweed on the left-hand side, those are formations, modified leaves that are underneath the petals. If you look way over on the bull thistle, these bracts have been modified into little spikes to dissuade predators, animals that would eat it. Okay, and then hairs. Now, the only animals that have hair, okay, are mammals. But when you're talking about wildflowers, they use the term hair. And you'll talk about the stem. Is it hairy or not hairy? Some of the violets, for example, are called woolly violets because they're covered with hairs on them. Okay, but this is one with spreading hairs. Notice the stem and the bracts underneath the petals. You see all those hairs. And they are without glands. It took me a while to figure out what are they talking about, glands, okay? But this is a hair without glands. This is a hawkweed, okay, that has spreading hairs. Then you look at dandelion. If you look careful, dandelion is really a beautiful plant. And in this case, notice how they're called oppressed hairs. In other words, they have hairy-like things, but they're pressed right up against the stem. And the third type is hair with glands on them. Notice the little balls on top of the hairs. And this is dwarf enchanter's nightshade. Okay, you can understand how witches might have thought this would be a good plant. But those glands on top of those hairs often produce secretions that are either protect the plant with a poison-like substance or sweetness to attract pollinators. Okay. Nectar tube. Okay, nectar tube. This is a wild columbine. Really beautiful. These nectar tubes make it very difficult for most insects to pollinate them. So what the plants are doing, they are selecting out which insects, or in some cases, which hummingbirds they want to, or moths, do they want to be pollinating them? Okay, so they're making selections that way. This is toad flax. I think it was Pliny, the naturalist, the Roman naturalist, who thought that he saw that there were toads that were seeking shelter underneath these plants, and so he named them. The name comes to be toad flax. But again, only certain insects can get down in there in order to get that nectar and thus pollinate the plant. Okay. Petals. Okay, very interesting petals. I showed you this before. This is the trillium, and it has 3 petals and 3 sepals. The yellow arrows pointing out the petals. And these petals are to attract pollinators. Really important what they're doing here. And then these are petals, by the way, these are radial petals. They're coming out from a central place. And in this case, this is bilateral. So your field guides will talk about the lateral petals or bilateral. This case, if you cut the plant down from top to bottom, you have basically 2 equal halves. But if you cut it across halfway, they're not equal. They look very different from each other. So bilateral or lateral, okay? I talked briefly about petioles. There's the fringed loosestrife. And by the way, the name loosestrife comes from the fact that in ancient times, the theory is that some army generals would feed the loosestrife to their war animals in order to calm their nerves. I don't know, maybe it's true. On the right-hand side is Sessile-leaved Bellwort. In this case, it doesn't really have a petiole. The leaf is just stuck right to the stem. And this is that beautiful bellwort. Only grows up about 8 inches. Yeah. Then rhizomes, these are roots that spread out. Think of lesser periwinkle, you might know as myrtle or vinca. They do that, but also things like phragmites, a lot of different plants send out roots, and then they pop up with what is, in essence, a new plant. It's actually part of the original plant, but that's how they reproduce and take over an area. And sepals, we saw the sepal on the trillium before, but those are the outer whorl, okay? They're modified leaves, and they have various different functions. One is to protect the blossom when it's still in bud. They close around the petals, and in some cases, it's used to support the petals, to hold them up where insects can get to them easily. Okay? So these are petals sepals rather, that are supporting the petals. And now this is common evening primrose, a really very common plant in disturbed areas or on roadsides. But in this case, these sepals are referred to as reflected. In other words, they're going in the opposite direction that the petals are going on. So if you see the term reflected, this is what they're talking about. Okay. These are two really favorite plants of mine. The one on the left, skunk cabbage. We'll see this again when I talk about spring ephemerals. And the jack in the pulpit, what I've done is taken that top part and just turned it back. Otherwise, it'll be flipping over the plant to protect it. They sort of look like some of the old churches where the preacher would be up underneath a canopy. And that jack in the pulpit is the plant on the right-hand side. That's the spadix. And on the inside, on the outside, is covering over is the spathe. That is that canopy. You can see in the inside, the flowers, compound flowers inside, underneath the spathe. Okay. And then Stahlins, this is myrtle again, common periwinkle, vinca, and they will grow across the surface of the ground. The leaves will then touch down, the stem will touch down the ground. They will grow roots and establish a new portion of the plant. Okay. In terms of flower reproductive parts, okay, this is the female reproductive part, okay. They have what's called a carpel. This is wild geranium, which are, by the way, are coming into blossom right now in my area in Newburyport. And so you have a stigma, that's where the pollen starts to go down in to fertilize the seed in the ovary, then the style and the ovary. So that's the female part. And the male part this is called a stamen, and the stamen includes both the anther where the pollen is produced and the filament, which usually holds the anther. So an insect or pollinator, even a hummingbird or something is coming in, they will rub up against those anthers and they'll get pollen on them, and that then is transferred to another plant or sometimes to the same plant. These will be coming in late May, okay? And then flower types, we have simple flowers. This is a tall buttercup, really handsome. In this case, a simple flower, if you look in the middle, there are a lot of these pistils. That is the female portion of blight, but there are multiple numbers of them in there. And then you have a stamen, okay? That's the anther and the filament. That's the male portion. And then you have the petals outside. So this is referred to as a simple flower. Now, much more interesting to me is this one. These are the composite flowers. Okay, this is an aster. Okay, well, look at. So it has two different types of flower in the same flower head. In the middle, that yellowish and reddish, those are the disc florets. They will develop, and they can develop seeds. And then notice the ray flowers. Each of those things that look like a petal is an individual flower. So it looks like a single blossom, but it's actually multiple with many different flowers appearing as a single flower. Okay. And then talking about the blossoms, the arrangement of the inflorescent forms, the arrangement of the flowers on the stem. Now, again, now we're talking about a panicle. Okay, so we have meadowsweet and we have steeplebush. It's sort of in a like a pyramid shape at the top of the flower. Yeah, meadowsweet and steeplebush, usually in open fields that are revegetating. Then you have a raceme. This is where on the left-hand side, it says it's gold, a silver rod. It's actually a type of goldenrod. Okay, a goldenrod that instead of gold, it's white, primarily white. But notice how the flowers are on short stalks, just like shin leaf in the right image. Now, why the name shin leaf? Well, this is a plant that was thought to have medicinal properties, that if you had a shin ailments, you would wrap it with this plant and that made you better, or it didn't. Okay. Then you have spikes, purple loosestrife. Okay. You know, this is a plant that is, many people don't like it because it's overtaking our wetlands in a lot of areas, but it's actually a stunning plant. And then you have blue vervain. So those are spikes. Well, these will be in your field guides when you're part of the aid to identify. An umbel, take a look at the common milkweed that's on the left-hand side. It looks like it looks like a fireworks has gone out. In other words, all of those flowers are coming from a central point. Okay. Well, and that's sort of globe shaped, rounded. But if you take a look at the one on the right, that's wild carrot. Now, you may well know this as Queen Anne's lace. Okay, it's the same plant. And instead of being in a ball, it's a flat shape, but still all of the blossoms are originating from the same spot at the top of the stem. Okay. And this is going to be very important for identification as you're looking through your field guide or you're doing an identification key. Now, these are leaves that are called simple. Okay, they are not divided. So on the left-hand side, there is bindweed, hedge, the number of different types of bindweed. This is hedge bindweed. And we'll come back to this plant later on. And then the yellow, this is yellow bluebeet, or also known as Canada lily. Okay, and so notice there are no teeth. They're just three separate leaves in that case. In other words, they're undivided. And your field guide will say, you know, it has divided leaves or simple leaves. That's what they're talking about. Yeah. This is palmate. If I hold up my hand, okay, it's sort of like the leaves are coming for like having 5 fingers. This is a cinquefoil, common cinquefoil. They're starting to come into blossom right now. So they sort of look like the palm of your hand with your fingers. Handsome little plant. And pinnate, we have crown vetch, which is a highly invasive plant. I think it was introduced at one point as a ground cover to hold back erosion. It would have been better if they hadn't introduced it, but we're living with it right now. So they have these little leaflets that come off the central stem, as is the tansy on the right-hand side. Tansy is one of those really beautiful plants that really goes into blossom in end of July, August. But notice the arrangement of the leaves. Okay. And how are the leaves arranged? We're talking about the various different types of leaves. Okay, but next thing now the guide will ask you to consider is, how are the leaves attached to the stem? In this case, I'm giving you 2 examples of where the arrangement is alternate. In other words, the leaves are arranged one on one side, and then a little further up, another on the other side. Okay, they're alternate. And we have goldenrods. I think all the goldenrods that I remember seeing have alternate. Okay. And then another one is the creeping bellwort. There's one leaf on one side, nothing opposite, and then a little bit another leaf. So that's what that term opposite and alternate are referring to. Okay. And here's opposite. Okay. The partridge berry. By the way, the partridge berries will be coming into blossom middle to end of May. Notice how, in this case, notice how the two flowers are directly connected together at the bottom. Okay, but in this case, the leaves are directly opposite from each other. The plant on the right, bone set. Okay, notice how the leaves are actually opposite leaves are actually fused together. Now, according to the doctrine of signatures, the doctrine of signatures is a theory that God, in traditional medicine, that God had created everything on this earth that humans need. Everything we need is right here. Okay, and that in terms of plants, God provided aids to identification or signs or signatures as to how that plant was to be used. So notice the bone set. Notice how those leaves are fused opposite to each other. Well, one theory is it comes from if you have a broken bone. Well, if God is telling you that if you use this bone set and wrap that broken bone in bone set, it will help it heal. I think the most likely one also has to do with it's a cure for dengue fever. Another name for dengue fever is bone break fever. And I think that is the more practical. That's how that plant was to be used as a medicinal plant. Okay. Then you have leaves that are whorl. Okay. So you have bedstraw. Bedstraw gets its name because these plants were used in old-time mattresses. If you're making a mattress out of straw or hay, okay, you'd throw some of this in, it would give a really nice smell to it. And then you have cucumber root on the right-hand side. So you come a stem, and then this all the leaves from the same part, then up a little bit, then a much smaller whorl of leaves. So they're talking about whorled leaves. That's what they're talking about. I think most folks would know right off what a basal for rosette would mean, but this is what they're on the left-hand side. We have plantain-leaved pussy toes. So those leaves are supposed to look like the plantain that you have as a weed in your lawn and so forth. And then you have another hawkweed, lots of hawkweeds. Again, the name hawkweed, where did that come from? Well, Pliny the Elder, which was a Roman, he was the top naturalist of his age. He thought that he had observed hawks coming to eat the blossoms of this plant in order to improve their eyesight. So that's where hawkweed gets its name. Yeah. So so we've seen what the leaves look like and how they're arranged, okay? And so another way to look at it, leaves, these are leaf margins that don't have any teeth on it. The right-hand plant is an orchid, pink lady slipper. They're protected. You can't pick them. Please don't pick them. Don't dig them up, please, okay? Because they won't survive in your garden. They have to be in close association with mycorrhizal fungus in order to survive. So don't, please, okay? But notice how the leaves there are no teeth or anything. They're not broken up. And then we have leaves that have distinct teeth. Notice the strawberry on the left-hand side. Another name for that is Indian strawberry. Okay, so we'll notice all of the teeth there. And then on the right-hand side is gold thread. Gold threads only sit up about 6 inches. It's one of those spring ephemerals that are going to be gone pretty soon, but it's a very distinctive leaf that you can see. And then to me, the flower looks like a fireworks have gone off. Why the name gold thread? Well, if you were to dig it up, and you don't dig it up, but if you were, you would see that the stem and the roots are gold in color. That's where that name comes from. Yeah. And then leaves that are lobed. These are referred to as lobes. They're usually leaf projections that are usually rounded. Okay, we have red dead nettles. In other words, this is a type of nettle that doesn't sting you, and the bloodroot on the right-hand side. I've been tracking the bloodroots in my area, Newburyport, West Newbury, this area, and they're just about gone now. I went to one place and I found 90 blossoms, and the last time I was there was one. So this is a spring ephemeral that goes really quickly. And then the guides will talk to you about veins. Well, what kind of veins do they have? Well, this is parallel. Now, they're not, in the mathematical sense, they're not parallel, but they certainly run in the same general direction. The one is goldenrods, and most goldenrods have that type of veins. And on the right-hand side, we have American false hellebore. Excuse me one second. Apparently, the name hellebore comes from the Greek, which means fawns eat it. Okay. The other thing about this traditional story about hellebore is that some of the indigenous peoples here, they would use this plant in order to select their next chief. And so they would have candidates, and they would all be given some of this false hellebore, and it's poisonous, slightly poisonous. And so the last man, in this case, the last man to throw up would be then the king. So just sort of interesting stuff. Notice these are, that we refer to these as feather veined. Okay? So instead of the veins going in the same general direction, they branch off like the branches of a tree. And this is a very important aid to doing identification. Okay. Common nipplewort, the word W-O-R-T or wort on the end of word means it has important medicinal or culinary uses. And if a woman has given birth and is not producing milk, well, you feed her some nipplewort, and that's supposed to help. Okay. And then you have netted veins like this one. This is a downy rattlesnake plantain. It's another orchid. But notice the beautiful, this plant, even if it didn't blossom, would be absolutely beautiful. Okay. And then fruit types, all different types. It's amazing how nature has all these different types. And the objective of nature is, how do I get my seeds from this plant dispersed through the area? How many different ways are there? This is an akene. This happens to be a beggar tick, called a beggar tick. And they get their name. Notice the seed that's on the right hand. Those are barbed awns. There are 4 of them. Some of them only have 2 awns. And it looks like a spear that you'd go chasing fish with and things of that nature. But notice those awns. And that's why if you're walking through, when the seeds are ready to be dispersed, they will catch in your clothing or the fur of your dog or a fox or whatever, and that's how they can then be distributed. Okay. So other examples of that. Okay. And then you have berries. I showed you this partridge berry before. Notice on the left-hand side, the 2 blossoms that you see. Now look at the one on the right-hand side, the berry. You see those 2 dimples? Okay, that's where the base of those flowers were that you see on the left. And apparently, they say that those flowers on the left cannot be pollinated at the same time, but they have to be both pollinated, and then they start producing that berry. And if you walk in the woods now, and you find some of this partridge berry, you can still see some of the berries left over from last year. Some more berries, large cranberries. Love going picking cranberries. The image on the left-hand side, that's bearberry. Bearberry. The other name for that is kinnikinnick. And this is a plant that's very common as you go further northern latitudes. And it was used by the indigenous peoples instead of tobacco, things of that nature. Okay. Then burrs. I think most people hate burdocks because they get in their animals' fur or on their clothing. But if you look at the blossom on the left-hand side, they are absolutely beautiful. Really stunning flowers. And I broke open one of the burrs to show you what the seeds look like in the center. Okay. So burrs, cocklebur, if you go to a sandy beach, that's cockleburs. They have those little thing. Notice the wild carrot, or you probably know it as Queen Anne's lace with those little burrs on it. And then you have capsules. This is Canada lily, a lily of open fields that are beginning to revegetate again. Notice all the seeds. And after the flowers, notice the flowers are drooping like this or nodding, okay? But when they become, the seeds begin to ripen, the head turns up. Okay, and then those seeds can be distributed either by an animal or somebody walking through it, or by the wind. Some more capsules. In my way of thinking, you can get as much enjoyment of going out in late summer and fall and looking at some of these seed capsules and seed pods, which are extraordinarily beautiful. Yeah. Then one of really my favorite plants, of course, are milkweed. They're so good for so many different butterflies, including monarch butterflies. Yeah. And notice a follicle just breaks in one section, breaks open in one side, as you see here. And then the seeds, what you see there in that beautiful golden brown, they're attached to what looks like a little parachute, and they are wind distributed. So whether the seeds are being distributed by wind, by attaching to something, by water, whatever, all these different methods. Some of these, notice that wild columbine. I mean, that's just such a beautiful seed pod. I think you get a lot of joy out of those. This is beach pea. Okay, this is a fruit that opens up. This is the seed here is of sandy or typically of along the ocean, like sandy islands and things like that. And these seeds that you see in the right-hand side, they are can last in seawater for up to 5 years. And so they're very often when you have a big storm, there's washovers, a lot of these seeds are picked up by the waves and carried off into the ocean, and they end up someplace else. Okay, more pods. That showy tick trefoil. Each one of those little things have little clasping pieces on it. So as you walk by, it will grab right onto your clothing. A silicle, okay. This is shepherd's purse. I guess I haven't ever seen a shepherd carrying a purse like that, but apparently that's what it is. And you might know the plant on the left-hand side as silver dollar plant, and that's certainly a common name for it. The more accepted in books anyway is annual honesty. And the reason for it is they say that this plant was supposed to because it looks like a coin, it was supposed to remind people, teach people about frugality and honesty. Wonderful stories that come out of these wildflowers and everything else in nature. Silique, this is the plant on the left-hand side. If you see it, it's non-native, it's highly invasive. If you have it around your property, you really should get rid of it. Notice it has four petals. That's garlic mustard. And it gets its name because if you take the leaves and you crush the leaves and smell it, it smells like garlic and a little bit of mustard. That's where that name comes from. Okay. So a month ago, we talked about petals and sepals, and this is a section on the problem with petals. Okay, many wildflowers have structures that appear to be petals but aren't. Okay, and so in your field guides, they're going to talk to you about petals. It has 4 petals or 5 petals or more than 10 petals. Okay, some of those things that they're calling petals aren't petals. Okay, but let me go through it. Okay, this is wood anemone, also called windflower. They're in blossom right now. Now, on a day today, because my area is very cloudy, they close up. They're nictinastic. In other words, they close when it gets dark or when it's overcast like this to protect the pollen inside. Okay, they don't want night pollinating insects to take their pollen, and they don't want water to wash their pollen away. But these things are actually sepals. While wood anemones don't have any petals. They look like petals. So in your field guide, if it looks like a petal, it's a petal. Okay. Okay, we talked about ray flowers again. Okay. These are not really petals, they're individual flowers that are all in that composite flower called florets. Okay. And then you have tepals. Okay, it's not a petal, it's not a sepal, it's a tepal. Okay, well, these are, as you can see on the strict blue-eyed grass and the Canada lily, they all look the same. Okay, but they're actually, except by their position, they all look the same, but they're a mixture of both petals and sepals that you're seeing here. But again, if it looks like a petal, it's a petal. Okay, for identification. So here, just in summary, you have tall buttercup that has 5 petals. You have the wood anemone that has 5 sepals. You have the thin leaf, which is a sunflower, which is a composite, has more than 7 ray flowers. And then you have the strict blue-eyed grass. Okay, so that's it. So but the key thing is for the identification process, if it looks like a petal, it's a petal. Okay, so let's work through an identification process. And what I'm using, which I find very good because it's really up to date. It's this book. Okay, it's Wildflowers, New England Wildflowers by Elliman. One of the real values of it is that the nomenclature has been updated to. If you go to some of the Peterson field guides, the nomenclature can be really quite old. Okay, so if we come on walking through a woodland area, this here is a spring ephemeral. Okay, these in my area, these have all gone by now. Well, 1 or 2 are still. So let's say you're walking through a woods and you come across this plant. Well, there you see the blossoms, and I don't care if they're sepals or tepals or petals. They look like petals, so I'm going to count them. Okay, I look at the leaf. Well, they have lobes on it. Okay, and then I look at the flowers in the group. So this is another one of those nyctinastic. They close up when it's nighttime and when it's highly overcast, as you'll see here. I photographed these on April 15th. So they're really early. Okay. So if we go into the guide, well, the first thing we noticed is that the petals are white. So the guide says, well, is it a white flower or a yellow flower? Well, pretty easy to figure out it's a white flower. Okay, so you're on the right page at least. Okay, you start many pages of white things, but we're starting here. Okay, and the next thing it asks you about how many petals. So it says, is that 4 petals? Is that 5 petals? No, this one has 7 or more petals. Okay, so we know we're getting closer. It has actually 8 petals. So 8 being more than 7, this is a good place to look. So you have various different choices. You have leaves simple, alternate, entire, or leaves simple, alternate, tooth or lobed, or leaves simple, whorled, or entire. Well, if we look at it carefully, these have leaves that are simple. In other words, there's not a group of leaves coming from the central stem. It's one leaf. It's basal. The leaf is coming right from the ground. It's either toothed, well, maybe toothed, but it's definitely lobed. Okay. So it says, well, you should go to take a look at page 130. If you're satisfied that it's a white flower, it has 7 or more radial petals, and the flower comes from the base and it's toothed or lobed, then 130 is a good place to look. Start looking. Okay. So if you go to page 130, for example, they give you a number of different plants that have radial petals. Okay. In this case, if you go look at the top, bloodroot is one of them. And so here is the leaves are from one stem. The leaves are unfolding the stem. And notice the fruit is a capsule. Just some more information that's important for you to do. Okay, so let's take a look at bloodroot. That looked pretty good because it definitely had more than 7 radial petals. The leaf is coming from the base and it's lobed, and it says early spring. Well, I took this photograph on April 14th. That's early spring. Okay, so the leaves are 2 to 12 inches. Okay, and it's deciduous. Well, we can't really tell that too much, but it says rich deciduous forest, woodlands, and clearings. Okay, and if you look at the bottom, you see where it's Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, so forth. And then you go, there is a scientific name. Okay, so here were some more information. And what is a scientific name? You can look it up. Dave's Garden. Okay, well, what does that mean? It means it's bloody. Well, if you break the stem, we don't do it, but if you broke the stem, the sap is blood colored. And this is a plant that was basically first documented from Canada. So that's why it's canadensis. It's just some more information there. And the common name is bloodroot. Okay. Okay, this is the family name. It's a member of the poppy family. So just tremendous amount of information here. And then it says, well, does it have white flowers? Yes, we said it has white flowers. And the blossoms, they're solitary. Yeah, they're coming right from the ground all by themselves. They have 8 to 12 petals. Well, we know the one that we showed had 8 petals to it. It has undulating lobes. That's sure. And the fruit, if you look at the bottom left image, it has a narrow capsule. Bingo. Okay. We have bloodroot. So those are how all those different terms have been used to get it. And it takes practice, but it's fun. Now, this works 99% of the time. But there are some plants that no matter how hard you try, it's difficult. This is hepatica, blunt-lobed hepatica. This is another one of those spring ephemerals forest plants, only grow up about 4 or 5 inches maximum. You'll find them in the leaf litter, as you're seeing right here. Okay, here's the problem with this one plant. Okay, the colors could be blue, purple, white, or pink. The number of petals can be anywhere from 5 to 12. So while the identification keys that we just walked through work very, very well most of the time, every once in a while, you'll find a plant that looks like this that is difficult to identify. Okay, so working through the identification process, I just wanted to show you a comparison between, this is the Peterson Guide to Wildflowers, and looking at the hepatica right there, really very beautifully illustrated. Okay, so low flowers, he puts them on low flowers of the woodlands. Okay, okay. Now, why use the Elliman Guide? Why is that important? Well, the positive features of it is it's the updated taxonomy and nomenclature. Okay, up to date. The species accounts are really very good. All the blossoms are shown in color, which is nice. And the color-coded identification key usually works very, very well. The less desirable ones is sometimes photographs are not nearly as good for identification as a line drawing as in the Peterson Guide. Okay. And the other thing is, I don't know why they did it, but the index is difficult to use. I'm used to looking up, if I know what plant is a clover, I go to the index and look for clover. And then I'm looking for white clover or red clover or any number of different type of clovers. But in this guide, they don't do it that way. They alphabetize it by the first name. So if you know it's a clover, but you don't know it's a red clover, it's a little bit hard to get to. That's the downside I see it. In terms of the Peterson field guides, positive identification, those hand drawing illustrations are fabulous. The fact that one person can draw all those illustrations is just amazing. And I find the index really, really easy to use. If you want to find a clover, you look under clover. And it says it's red or white or some other one. Okay. The less desirable features of the nomenclature and taxonomy can be out of date. If that's not really important to you, then that's fine. Okay. Okay. So here, as a comparison between the hepatica, what you see in the Elliman Guide is what's on the left. What you see in the Peterson Guide is on the right. Okay. Now, I'm going to just go into some of the amazing wildflowers we have because the diversity in wildlife is just one of the most amazing. If we all look the same or we're all the same, it would be so boring. And it's so same in nature. The more diversity, the more beautiful this is. Okay. So the first group of wildflowers, the ones that are evergreen, no matter if you go out in January, you can still find, wow, this is that partridge berry again. We've seen it a couple times. There's the fruit with the dimples, but here it is, evergreen, right through the wintertime. So I love to go out walking in the winter, and you come across some of your old friends here that you've been watching all year, and here is the partridge berry. Wintergreen, spotted wintergreen. Some books say that's striped wintergreen, but I think the officially accepted name is spotted wintergreen. Matter of fact, if I went on the internet and I looked up, well, what's the difference between spotted wintergreen and striped wintergreen? And I put in striped wintergreen and it came back to me with spotted wintergreen. So anyway, notice the capsules that you see on the top. Those are the seed pods, wind distributed seeds. This is winterberry, also wintergreen, also known as checkerberry with its berry. Okay. This is gold thread. We saw this before, but here it is in the snow. And shin leaf. So you can go out on a nice winter day and you can still see some of these beautiful wildflowers in leaf and in seed. This is Pipsissewa. Yeah. This is from the indigenous people called this the flower of the woods. Okay. And bearberry or bearberry or kinnikinnick. So you can see these things. The spring ephemerals, that's where we are right now. And in some cases, for some of these spring ephemerals, it's late now. Okay. But here's the skunk cabbage. We saw this before with the spathe and the spadix. Okay. The flower is that white thing right in the center. This is an amazing plant. It's our first wildflower. And it comes up in the middle of March. It's thermogenic. In other words, it can produce its own heat. Notice the illustration on the bottom right-hand side. Okay, it can produce by exposing starch to the air. It produces heat, and they can actually burrow their way up through the snow and ice to come to the surface. And they are in blossom by the middle of March. You usually see, as in the left-hand illustration, you'll see the flower before the leaves are actually coming out. Okay? This is coltsfoot. This is not native to skunk cabbage. Certainly is. If you're a horse person, okay, if you look at the bottom illustration on the bottom right, does that look like a coltsfoot? Maybe. Okay. Another name for this is son before father. S-O-N before father. Because what you get to see, if you look at the left illustration, it's already in blossom and there are no leaves yet. So it produces its seeds, flowers, and seeds really early on. Okay, I photographed these first one on April 10th. Okay, here we talked about wood anemones before. They are, if you go out in the woodlands, I mean, if you were to walk around Great Meadows Wildlife Sanctuary in Lincoln, Concord rather, and other places like you should be still seeing these at least for a couple more weeks. Okay, that's that gold thread again. They're gone by now. Then we have plants that decide, well, why should I put all my energy into all kinds of stems and things like that? Why don't I just twine and climb over things? I could grow much, much faster because I don't have to waste energy on producing a big stem that can hold me upright. And they acquire their space and nutrients and light with minimal investment in resources. So this is cow vetch. It just sort of grows on top of everything. Okay, it's non-native. This is another one of those plants they thought would be good as ground cover to stop erosion. Okay. This is wild cucumber. Okay. It just grows, again, on top of other plants. It's just a vine. Notice the fruit in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay. Bittersweet nightshade, another non-native plant. That's what that A means after a bittersweet nightshade. It just tumbles and grows over everything else. Okay. Bindweeds are known for it. Notice in the left-hand image, you have the bindweed actually curling its way around another plant. If you're a gardener, you need to be aware of it. This is good, well-named. This is arrow-leaved tear thumb. Just look at the center illustration. You don't want to try to pull that out without gloves on your hand, but just basically grows over everything else. Then we have plants that make their living by being parasitic. They leave either all or some of their nutrients from other plants. This is Indian pipe. Okay. So you can see the second image from the left. Here it's in blossom. It has no chlorophyll. It uses mycorrhizal fungus in order to absorb nutrients from other plants that are around it. Then it goes into seed, the second from the right, and then those are the seed pods from the previous year. Notice the flowers are drooping down, nodding, but then when it comes time to distribute the seeds, it turns up so it can be wind. Wind can carry the seeds away. Another one, pine sap. They are parasitic on pines and fir trees. They just only grow up about 8 or 10 inches. No chlorophyll again. Okay. Cancer root. Okay. So these are parasitic plants, and this is dodder, common dodder. This is an important food plant for some butterflies, but this is you can just see how it's just draped over the host plant here, and it has root-like organs that it then penetrates into the stem and into the leaves of other plants and extracts nutrients from the host plant. So not only is it overlying the host plant, partially shading it from the sun, is also stealing nutrients from it. And then you have beautiful plants like this foxglove that you typically find in oak forests, around the edges of oak forests. And it does have chlorophyll, it does produce its own food, but it is also parasitic on the roots of oak trees. And we have carnivorous wildflowers. Just think of the various different ways nature has found to support these plants. Okay, they're typically in nutrient-poor soils. So I think a lot of people are familiar with sundews. There are 3 different types of sundews in New England. I have 2 of them here. This is round-leaved sundew. The blossoms are only about a 1/16 of an inch. Okay. Okay. And this is spatulate-leaved sundew. If you take a look at the beautiful little blossom, only about a 1/16 of an inch across. And then you have the pads. Okay, and so a lot of these pads will produce a type of nectar. Insect will land on it, and then they close around the insect and then absorb the nutrients out of the dead insect. So here's just a comparison between the two. I found these side by side in the same bog, where they're really poor soil, very acidic soil, where they're very, very short of nutrients. They're supplementing it. And then I think a lot of people are familiar with pitcher plants, but maybe have never seen the blossoms, which stand up about 12 to 15 inches. And you have the pitcher that you see on the left. And if we take a really close look at it, okay, notice the image on the right-hand side. There are 2 insects in there. Okay? Notice the pitcher. Those are, again, only mammals have real hair, but hair-like structures that are facing down. So the shape and the orientation of the blossom, it's easy for a insect to fly in, but it's very difficult for them to fly out. And if they try to climb up the lip of that pitcher plant, those little spiny things, hair-like things, prevent them from doing it. So eventually the insect just runs out of energy, dies, disintegrates, and the plant then absorbs the nutrients from that water that has a little nectar in it. Okay. And then bladderworts. This is a tiny little blossom, only a 1/4 of an inch in freshwater, little marshes, and it has little bladders underneath the water that a little larva of some kind can go into it but can't escape, and then that bladder then absorbs the nutrients. And then we have some aquatic wildflowers. This is yellow water buttercup. The right image, notice the leaves are underwater, but they're still absorbing the solar radiation, solar light. And then the flower is above the water so it can be pollinated. I've only seen this plant once, and I've been many, many places looking for wildflower. This is featherfoil. This could be in a little pond like this one was, and then you don't see it again for 5 or 6 years. But a very strange floating plant. Notice the leaves, those feathery things are the leaves. And then you get the fruiting bodies above it. And then pond lilies, I think a lot of people are familiar with pond lilies, but how many have actually taken time to look at the beautiful blossom that's inside? That's really something really intricate. And this is swamp smartweed. It can also grow on land. I've seen this growing on land or in a big mat. This happens to be in a reservoir. Okay, and it's just a floating mass of vegetation, and it can move around with the wind and things of that nature. But it can be both terrestrial or living in the water. And then these are plants that are absolutely dependent on mycorrhizal fungus. We talked briefly about the pink lady slipper. Again, the seeds that are just like dust. okay? And they have no nutrients. The seeds fall on the ground. The mycorrhizal fungus makes contact with those seeds, brings nutrients into that seed. The seed starts to develop and grow, and then the mycorrhizal fungus at some time in the future will take some nutrients back. So this plant could not reproduce were it not for the mycorrhizal fungus. Almost all of our um, orchids need that mycorrhizal fungus. And by the way, I didn't realize it, but orchids are the largest family of flowering plants in the world. We think of asters as being it. No, it's the orchids. We don't have very many in New England, but worldwide they're just tremendous number. Here's another orchid, white fringed orchid. I showed you the leaves of the webbed leaves here of the plantain before, but here this is that other orchid again. Doesn't get its flowers until late summer. Okay. And nodding, these nodding ladies' tresses. Okay. And here are plants that are absolutely dependent on ants. Okay. So this is the trout lilies. You might find some still in blossom, but they're pretty well done now. And again, the leaves apparently to some people look like the color that a trout would have when you're looking at it in a stream, the fish, the trout. And another possible explanation is they come to blossom when the trout start moving up rivers to spawn. Trout are really beautiful, but they're dependent on ants um, to distribute their seeds. The seeds have a little lysosome on it, little nutrient value. The ants carry that back. Another one the ants carry it back to their colony and just cast it away. So here's this purple trillium, but notice it can also be white. Okay, so really thing, and the bloodroot. And a rue anemone. We've seen a lot in this presentation of wood anemones. This is the rue. It gets the name rue anemone because the leaves of this plant look similar to the rue plant, R-U-E plant of Eurasia. And finishing up here now, Dutchman's breeches. Looks like a pair of pants upside down, the blossoms do. And that's the end of the presentation. And I'd be really, if you have some observations that you'd like to make about some of the wildflowers that you've been seeing in your area, or if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. It was such a great presentation. I'm particularly fascinated by the carnivorous plants, for sure.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any last minute questions they want to ask? And if not, Bill, would you like to recommend some places where people can go besides their backyard to view the wildflowers?
Well, down in Lexington, Dumback Meadow is a really good place for different types of wildflowers throughout the year. I'm sorry, in Dumback Meadow, I can't remember the elementary school that's it's right near Route 2. And I just can't remember the name of it there, but there are some trails that go into a marshy area. You should be able to go in there and see marsh marigolds and skunk cabbages and things of that nature are really good. A really nice place to look for wildflowers is to go to Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Concord. That's a really good place. There's the Bedford Town Forest in Bedford. So those are just some of the areas that come right to mind.
Great, thank you. And Sandy just wants to know which Peterson guide would be a good for a starter like herself.
Okay, which guide? Well, it's the Peterson. It has been updated, so it's not terribly out of date. But if you go to, it's a Peterson Wild Guide series, and let's see, this is an older version, a field guide to wildflowers. Again, that is an excellent guide. It does break out the wildflowers by color, but the vast majority of illustrations are just in black and white, but the page says they are yellow. Okay, so I mean that's a very good guide to use. I highly recommend that. I've just gotten used to using the Elliman guide. Very often I'll use both. Oh, very often I'll go and take a look I'll look at the element and say that looks good, but the illustrations are not, because the photographs are not as good as the illustrations in Peterson, and then I'll double check it with the Peterson guide.
Great, thank you. And April says, thank you, Bill. She says it's fascinating.
Well, I look forward to seeing you again in the near future, Helen. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Great, it was a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us tonight. To have a great day.